Okay, hiya Year 10. Well done for all your work so far this week. I've been having a look on Teams and you've all done some really fantastic answers, which I'm going to go through and try and give you some comments on later on in the week. So it's our third and final lesson this week, and we're going to be following on from what we've already done and continuing to have a little look at some of those challenges that Elizabeth faces when she first becomes queen in 1588. So today's question is, what was Elizabeth's biggest problem? Okay, and there's a couple of big problems that she has right from the start. Obviously, we saw yesterday about the issues with legitimacy. So, the fact that she's a woman, number one, the fact that her father, Henry VIII, broke with Rome in order to divorce his first wife and marry her mother, Anne Boleyn, which obviously was a little bit iffy in the eyes of many, particularly Catholics, who at this point is probably still the majority. And she has a variety of other issues as well that aren't really anything to do with her personally, that we're going to have a look at as well. So effectively, the bottom line that we've discovered this week is when Elizabeth becomes queen, she has a lot stacked against her. Okay, and given that she becomes this incredibly successful monarch, hopefully this really just shows you the scale of that achievement. Okay, so today we're going to be doing these two things. We're going to first of all have a look at what problems she's facing alongside those challenges to legitimacy, and we're going to try and decide which of those we think was the most important. So we're going to evaluate, we're going to have a look at the different scales of threats, and we're going to try and decide which we think was the most dangerous. Okay, so we're going to start by watching a clip. So this is a film you may have heard of. It won Oscars at the time. It was very, very popular. Came out in 1998, starring Cate Blanchett as Elizabeth. And it's quite a good film to watch. I mean, I would say it's possibly, I think it's a 15, so obviously you may not be old enough, but if you are, it is probably worth watching. There are some pretty good bits in there, just to kind of help you understand the story. But we're going to watch a little clip from it now, and this is from towards the beginning of the film. So Elizabeth has just become queen. It's literally minutes after her coronation. You can see in the video that she's literally having her crown and things taken off because she's just done all the ceremony. And she's being spoken to by William Cecil. Now, we met William Cecil yesterday. He was her Secretary of State, her most important minister, head of the Privy Council. And this is just him kind of rattling off some of the challenges she is facing as soon as she becomes queen. So what I'd like to do is watch carefully. As you're watching, try and jot down in a couple of bullet points what problems Elizabeth is facing when she becomes queen, and then we'll go through it together.
But you have inherited a most parlous and degenerate state. It's threatened from abroad by the ambitions of France and Spain, and is weaker in strength, in men, monies, and riches than I have ever known it.
What are you saying?
Madam, your treasury is empty. The navy is run down. There is no standing army, and we are bare of munitions. There is not a fortress left in England that could withstand a single shot.
I've no desire to go to war, sir.
But that is not the end of it. Apart from abroad, here at home there are those who wish your majesty ill. Mary of Scots has already laid claim to your throne. And Norfolk covets it relentlessly. Madam, until you marry and produce an heir, you will find no security.
Okay, so let's just check you've got them all. So number one, she's being threatened by France and Spain. So the key thing to understand here, guys, and we'll talk about this more in a later lesson, is England is a Protestant country at this time, okay, and that's pretty rare, all right? There aren't very many Protestant countries in Europe, let alone the world, okay? So France and Spain, they're effectively the kind of the big powers. Spain is what we would, we've looked at superpowers quite a lot, obviously with the Cold War. Spain is the equivalent of a superpower at this time, okay? It's incredibly wealthy, incredibly powerful, controls a lot of land, and it's also Catholic. Meanwhile, England is this little piddly Protestant country that really is not very strong at all in comparison to those big powers in Europe, France and Spain. So we've got problems from them. The other threat we've got is the fact that the country is weak, okay, so it's weak in men, it's weak in money, and it's weak in just general kind of supplies. He talks about there's not a fortress in England that could withstand an attack, so its defences are underfunded, they're falling apart, they're pretty, they've kind of been neglected for many years, their army is not in a good shape, neither is their navy, they're just, basically, if they go to war, they're in trouble, okay, they're not equipped to defend themselves because of all those issues. And the biggest problem is the lack of money. Okay, they're massively in debt. They comment that the treasury is empty, and obviously you can't fix the other problems if you haven't got any cash, so that's one issue. The other one is there are people within England itself, within the British Isles, that also want Elizabeth gone. All right, we've already talked about those issues with legitimacy. There are going to be lots of Catholics within the country who might want her dead, want her off the throne at the very least. Particularly, there is her cousin, Mary, the Queen of Scots, who is a Catholic and therefore could pose a threat. And we're going to talk a lot more about her in a later lesson. Got another source here just to kind of add to this. So this is from a guy called Walter Mildmay. He was a courtier. He was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Okay, we still have a Chancellor. Our current Chancellor is Rishi Sunak. Okay, and what the Chancellor does is they are in charge of the money. Okay, they're in charge of the treasury of the country. So you may have seen a month or so ago, Rishi Sunak, our current Chancellor, he went on TV and he offered lots of money to people that have lost their jobs because of the coronavirus crisis. Okay, so that it's the same job, just being in charge of the money of the country. So this is what Walter Mildmay had to say about Elizabeth's problems. Elizabeth inherited a realm miserably overwhelmed with popery. Okay, popery is not a word that we would use a lot, but you can probably guess what it means. It means people that follow the Pope, i.e. Catholics. Dangerously afflicted with war and grievously afflicted with debts, the burden of which three cannot be remembered without grief. So he's talking about this some years later. Her Majesty most carefully delivered the kingdom from a great and weighty debt with which it had long been burdened. The realm is not only cleared of this great burden, but also Her Majesty's credit, both at home and abroad, is greater than any other prince for money. So he's added a new problem here, which is this problem of Catholicism still being within the country, still being kind of latent. The way to think about this, guys, is you think about, we spent a long time looking at sort of communism versus capitalism, those two ideologies. It's a very similar situation. We're going to talk a lot more about the difference in a later lesson, but Catholics versus Protestants, Catholicism versus Protestantism are the two big ideologies at this time. And as with communism and capitalism, they hate each other. So, yeah. Catholics are a challenge. The big problem that Walter's talking about is debt, money, okay? And that's what we're going to start this lesson by discussing. Okay, so a big problem that Elizabeth has is money. As they said in the video, the treasury was empty, all right? She had almost zero money, okay? So just to put this in perspective, her annual income, so the amount of money that the Crown made every year from various sources that we'll talk about in a sec, was about 286,000, okay, pounds a year. Obviously, it would be worth a lot more than that. These days, that would be millions in modern money. But at the time, that's how much it was. That's what she could make every single year. And this is what she owed, £300,000. So she was in debt more than she earned an entire year. Okay, that wasn't Elizabeth's fault. That was a debt she inherited. All right, we've already talked about Mary going to war. So she went to war to support her husband, Philip, from Spain. They went to war with France. Expensive. They lost, okay, so she had to borrow a lot of money to pay for that. Henry VIII, Elizabeth's dad, he was also very, very interested in war, and he invaded France a few times as well. Now, Henry, his strategy for paying for his wars was called debasement. He debased the coinage. What that means is you take away the amount of silver that's in a coin. Okay, so obviously if there's less silver in a coin, you can make more coins because you don't have to put as much silver in them. So you can melt down all you've got, make more coins out of it because you're not putting as much silver in. What's the problem with putting less silver in a coin? It's not worth as much. All right, so what you end up with is inflation. Okay, it's the equivalent of what we saw in the Weimar Republic when they printed off lots of money. If you're making lots of coins with less silver in, those coins are worth less. That leads to inflation. So Henry was a big one for doing that. He liked to debase the coinage. It was his way of paying for war. And what that means is there was horrible inflation and Elizabeth's treasury was not doing so well. And in fact, this is one of Henry VIII's coins. You can see there he is. Okay, and you can actually see on this coin that it's a little bit of a red colour, all right, sort of reddish tone to it, which obviously is a bit weird because it's meant to be a silver coin, and the reason it's a bit red is because it's actually made of copper, okay, because the layer of silver on top is so thin because they put so little silver in this coin that he actually looks a bit red. Okay, so there was a nickname, Henry VIII was nicknamed at one point Old Copper Nose because of the fact that his coins often look like this, where you can see there wasn't as much silver to cover them. Okay, so that debasement, debasing the coinage, taking the quantity of silver out of it, That led to problems, and that's how Henry tried to pay his debts. So obviously a lot of people didn't really want to lend him any money because he'd pay them back with rubbish coins. Okay, so Elizabeth has got to find a way to sort this out. She's got to get more money. She's got to pay off these debts and get more money. You can't be a strong kingdom if you don't have cash, because you've got to pay for troops, you've got to pay for defences, you've got, all of that costs money. And if you don't have money, you can't defend yourself, you can't fight. All right, which means your kingdom is as good as lost. All right, if you don't have the cash to defend it, what's the point? So the obvious solution to get more money is raise taxes, right? Go see Parliament, say you need more money, get them to grant you more. What's the problem with that? Well, a couple of things. Number one, even if we ignore we have to go ask Parliament for it, people don't like paying taxes. All right, so if you bump taxes up, people are going to get annoyed. All right, the people of your kingdom are going to get a bit peed off with you because they don't want to pay more taxes. All right, because who does? No one wants to give up more money. All right, so that's going to cause problems. It's going to be unpopular if you raise taxes. The other problem is if Parliament put taxes up for you, they're probably going to want something in return. All right, they're not going to do it out of the goodness of their hearts. And what they're going to want in return is more power. They're going to want more say. Okay, they're going to want to have some control over certain issues. They're going to want the Queen to listen to them, and so on. Now, Elizabeth doesn't really fancy that because she wants to be in charge, right? She doesn't want some meddlesome MPs telling her what to do. She wants them to give her the cash and go away, all right? But increasingly, Parliament aren't willing to do that, particularly because she's a woman. So they feel that they're a bit more confident about bossing her about than perhaps they would have been with a male ruler. So Elizabeth doesn't want to ask Parliament for more money because it's unpopular and because then she might have to start giving them more power in return. So she has got to find other ways to raise this cash. And she's got 4 options for this. So what I'd like you to do is have a look at these 4 pictures, pause the video, have a little look, try and work out what 4 ways the government has to raise money. Okay, you don't need to write this down unless you really want to, because I'm going to tell you the answers in a sec. But I want you to try and work it out from the pictures, and then I will explain. So just pause the video now, and then start it up when you think you've got it. Okay, so back again. Let's do the answers then. So this first one, this is something you might see in an airport. Obviously, unfortunately, probably not going to see it this year. But this is something you might see if you just come back from holiday on a ferry or a plane. It is a tax duty-free shopping. So what way of making money could this suggest to us? Customs duties, right? Yeah, so you can make money from trade, all right? When people bring goods into your country, you can make them pay a tax. All right, that's why at an airport it's called duty free, because you can buy goods without having to pay any extra tax on them. If you bought those goods, normally you would have to pay tax to bring them into the country or whatever. You might notice when you come back off a plane, there's nothing to declare or not, and that's because if you're bringing something back, you have to go and tell the airport what you've brought and probably pay a tax on it. All right, so Elizabeth can make a bunch of money using those. Okay, and we'll talk about how much in just a sec. This one, rents from lands. Okay, she owns a whole bunch of land, the Crown lands. Okay, major landowner, the Queen, even is today. Okay, so that's a way of making money. This one, loans. Okay, you can borrow money. And then this one, profits of justice. So what that means is money that you get from the justice system. So i.e. if you fine somebody, all right, you get money, obviously, for that. If they committed a crime and they have to pay a fine, that's money for you. If they're a criminal, you can take land off them, take property off them. That gives you extra money as well. Okay, so those are all pretty good options for making cash. And we're going to talk a little bit more about them now. Okay. Okay, so customs duties. We've already talked about this just a little bit. Okay, these are the taxes you pay on goods being brought in. Okay, when Elizabeth first takes the throne, she's bringing about 83 grand a year just through customs taxes. All right, that's a pretty healthy chunk of the money she can make. In terms of Crown lands, okay, you can get money from these in 2 ways. First of all, because people live on that land and pay you rent. Okay, the tenant farmers that we mentioned a couple of lessons ago. And you also can, obviously, if it's a farm, if it's farmland, that grows, it grows crops, it grows produce that you can then sell. Okay, so that's another bonus. All right, you can make money from it that way. Okay, and she makes at the start of the reign about 86 grand a year off these rents and income from her lands. Okay, so again, a pretty healthy chunk of the money she has. The third option is loans. Now, I've said here they were sometimes compulsory, in inverted commas, and never repaid. Okay, now the reason for this is technically in England at the time, borrowing money and making people pay interest on it, that was banned, all right, because that's called usury, and the church see that as a sin. So the only way to borrow big sums of money, really, is to borrow it from abroad. Okay, now we've already said that Elizabeth and Mary and Henry, both spent a whole bunch of money on war when they were on the throne. Okay, so Elizabeth, bless her, when she gets to the throne, she discovers she is over 100k in debt, thanks to those previous wars that her sister and father spent money on, and that debt has an interest rate of about 14%. All right, so quite high. So Elizabeth doesn't want to borrow any more money from foreigners, okay, because she owes them a lot of money anyway. And also, to be honest, it doesn't look great, all right, having to go to foreign people to borrow money off them. So what Elizabeth does is she raises her money at home, okay. So that's good for a couple of reasons. Number one, they can't make you pay interest because it's not allowed in England. Number two, she can keep it on the down low. Okay, if you're borrowing money from a foreigner, they can tell anybody they want about it. They can, be very open about it. If it's one of your own subjects, you can order them to keep it quiet. All right, because you're their queen. So no one will know, which is great. And the other thing is, you can kind of force it out of people. So you can say, right, you, Duke of Northumberland, I need some cash and you're going to lend me £1,000. Thank you. And if they try and say no, well, for one thing, you're the queen, they can't say no. And for another thing, you can say, oh, well, I guess you don't love your country, you're unpatriotic, which obviously is going to, incentivise people to give up that cash. Okay, quite a lot of the time, if we're honest, Elizabeth never paid that money back. Okay, she forced people to lend it to her and then just didn't return it because they were her subjects. So what can they do? All right, so loans are a decent way of getting money, but you can't get loads. And she's already in quite a bit of debt as it is. Final option is the profits of justice. So as I said, this is from fines. So at this point, lots of crimes were punishable by a fine. Okay, so you can make money from that. And taking land off criminals. So you can say, right, well, you're a criminal and you've been executed, so I guess you don't need that land anymore. So yoink, I'm going to have that. So she makes land from that. Obviously, she can then make money from the same way she makes money from the rest of her land. Obviously, the trouble with this is this isn't going to provide you with a lot of money, because if you get a lot of money from profits of justice, well, that obviously means there's a lot of crime, because you're collecting lots of money from it. So we don't really want that. So obviously, profits of justice can't be that big a source of income. They're just a kind of nice little tasty bonus. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, based on what I've just talked you through, okay, and obviously you can rewind and pause and listen to bits again, is I would like you to answer these 4 questions for me. Obviously, I'll put this PowerPoint and show my homework for you, so you have it to kind of scroll through at your leisure along with this video. But I would like you to answer those 4 questions in full sentences. So to be clear, for number 1, you would say, Elizabeth's financial situation at the start of her reign was whatever, okay? This was the case because blah. All right, I don't just want you going because. All right, you don't start a sentence with because, it's a full sentence. Okay, so you've got 4 questions to answer. Make sure you get those done in lots of detail. And then when you're ready, start the video back up again and we'll talk you through the next bit. Okay, so last task for today then, sort of the bigger task really, is you're going to have a look at what the other problem was. So we've already said, yeah, big problem Elizabeth has is debt. Okay, a massive problem is that England has no money. That's a problem because if you've got no money, you can't defend yourself. All right, she pays the debts off actually pretty rapidly by 1574. But if you go into war again with anybody else, you might as well not have bothered paying it off because you're going to get in a whole bunch more debt very, very rapidly. Okay, so Elizabeth, as I say, she has a number of places that she is under threat from. So places like France, Spain, Scotland. We've already mentioned Mary Queen of Scots. She's a bit of a pain, okay, amongst others. So she's a little bit threatened from a number of areas. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do is you have got a map that looks like this. If you can't print it off, just in your book, just do the headings. Okay, that's fine. So you've got 4 areas that are a big problem for Elizabeth in terms of her foreign policy, so what she's doing in terms of abroad and foreign powers. And I would like you to use those sources to fill in these boxes. Okay, now I'm not going to do a video for this time because I think it's fairly straightforward. But if you are stuck, obviously let me know either through Teams or by email, and we'll probably go through it next week. All right, so you're going to use the sources I've attached to show my homework to get some information about each of these threats to Elizabeth. What I'd then like you to do is, obviously you can't discuss it, but I would like you to write in your book an answer as to which of those three powers you think was the most of a biggest threat. Okay, was it Scotland, was it France, was it Spain? Who do you think was the most dangerous and why? And obviously, if you want to do that really well, the way we think of a really good decision in history is by comparing. So you would say something like, I think Scotland was more dangerous than France because blah, 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 blah. Okay, or something along those lines. Okay, that comparison is what takes your answer from being decent to being really good. All right, that evaluation, weighing things up. Okay, so your final task then, and again, I'm going to ask you to post this on Teams so that I can have a look at it when I have a look later this week at all the work you've done. And I would like you to decide, what was the biggest threat to Elizabeth? Was it foreign enemies? So was it France, Spain, Scotland? Was it one of them? Or was it the fact she doesn't have any money? Is it that financial instability that is the biggest threat to her power? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to make that decision, justify it. As I've said, the really good answers are going to compare. So foreign enemies were more dangerous than financial problems because, or whatever it is you decide. Okay, and I'll have a look at those on Teams and I'll get you some feedback on those answers before the weekend. All right, guys, thank you for listening. I hope that was all sort of reasonably helpful. As ever, if you have any questions at all, please just drop me an email or contact me via Teams. Try and avoid posting things on Show My Homework, because I don't tend to see those. So email or Teams is better. Okay, and let me know if you're having any problems.